Video opens with a woman, Clara, mid-30s, looking directly at the camera. She's well-dressed, exuding quiet confidence, but there's a flicker of past hurt in her eyes. Behind her, through a large window, a glimpse of a luxurious garden and part of another, equally impressive house can be seen. My name is Clara, I'm 34 years old, and for a long time, the person whose approval I craved most was the one who seemed determined to withhold it. He once told me, with a casual cruelty that still echoes in my quieter moments, that I was too poor, too insignificant, to even step foot inside his brand-new mansion for a family celebration. He said I wouldn't fit in. Imagine hearing that from your own father. What would you do? Would you let it break you? Would you let it define your limits, your worth? Or would you let it ignite something within you, a fire so fierce it could light up the entire damn sky? I remember standing there, phone pressed to my ear, the silence on my end deafening as his words, each one a perfectly polished stone, dropped into the well of my already fractured self-esteem. It wasn't just about the money, you see. It was never just about the money, though he always made it seem that way. It was about belonging, about being seen, about being valued for who I was, not what I had. He'd built his life around the gleam of gold, the prestige of possessions, and in his eyes, I hadn't accumulated enough sparkle to warrant a place in his orbit. That day, something inside me didn't just break, it shattered, and then, from those shards, something new began to form. A resolve. A promise to myself. He thought my world was too small for his grand new life. He had no idea I was about to expand my world in a way that would place me right on his doorstep, not as a supplicant, but as an equal. Little did he know his casual dismissal, his belief in my inherent lack, would become the very catalyst for a journey that would lead me to buy the mansion right next door to his. The irony still makes me smile, a tight, knowing smile that understands the universe's peculiar sense of humor. Hey everyone watching, it's Clara and welcome to my channel. Wow, it feels good to finally say that out loud, the whole story, or at least the start of it. I'm already seeing some familiar faces in the chat. Hi. For those of you who are new, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can travel. And if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and giving this video a big thumbs up. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around to hear how a daughter, deemed too poor for a party, ended up becoming her father's very affluent, very present, next-door neighbor. It's a story about more than just houses. It's about building a life on your own terms, brick by painstaking brick, especially when someone tries to tell you you're not even worthy of laying the foundation. This isn't just about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. It's about the quiet satisfaction of knowing you silenced the doubters, especially the ones whose voices echoed loudest in your own head, often because they were put there by those closest to you. The journey was long, it was arduous, and there were moments I wanted to give up, moments I doubted if I even had the right to dream so big. But that single, dismissive comment from my father became my northern star, guiding me through the darkest nights of self-doubt and exhaustion. It was a painful gift, wrapped in sandpaper, but a gift nonetheless. Alright, so to really understand the magnitude of that phone call, the depth of the wound his words inflicted, and ultimately the sheer audacity of my response, we need to rewind. Way back. Let me take you back to how this all began, to the roots of this complicated, often painful, family dynamic. Because this story, like most stories of its kind, didn't start with a mansion or a cutting remark. It started in the quiet, unseen moments of a childhood where the rules of love and acceptance were subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, laid out. My father, Richard, was a man sculpted by ambition. From as early as I can remember, he was driven, his focus laser-sharp on success, on climbing the next rung of whatever ladder he'd set his sights on. He wasn't an overtly cruel man in those early days, not in the traditional sense. He was preoccupied. His energy was an external force, always pushing outwards towards goals and achievements that, more often than not, were measured in dollars and cents, or in the admiring glances of his peers. He provided for us, yes, in the material sense, We never lacked for food or shelter. But there was always an undercurrent, a sense that love and attention were commodities to be earned, resources allocated based on perceived potential for reflecting glory back onto him. My mother, bless her heart, was a softer presence, a gentle soul caught in the gravitational pull of my father's relentless drive. She was the peacekeeper, the one who would try to smooth over his brusque dismissals or his pointed comparisons. But her efforts were often like trying to calm a storm with a whisper. She loved us, I have no doubt, but she rarely challenged him, rarely stood as a bulwark against the subtle, corrosive effects of his conditional approval. I think, in her own way, she was also trying to earn her keep in his world, a world where value was transactional. And then there was Leo, my older brother. Leo was the sun around which our family's solar system seemed to revolve, at least in my father's eyes. He was the golden child, the anointed one. Everything Leo did was imbued with a special significance. His schoolboy triumphs were legendary, his minor missteps charmingly roguish. My father saw himself in Leo, or perhaps the idealized version of himself he wished he'd been. The praise flowed towards Leo like a river, effortless and abundant, while for me, it felt like I was trying to catch rain in a thimble. It wasn't that Leo was malicious, not intentionally, not back then anyway. He simply basked in the warmth of that approval, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, the shade it cast over me. He accepted the accolades, the advantages, as his due, because he'd never known anything different. And why would he question a system so clearly designed in his favor? My early memories are filled with these contrasts, these unspoken hierarchies. My own interests from a young age leaned towards the quiet, the analytical. I loved books, puzzles, understanding how things worked. I'd spend hours taking apart old radios, much to my mother's mild exasperation, just to see the intricate dance of wires and circuits within. I excelled in school, particularly in math and science, driven by an innate curiosity and, admittedly, a growing hunger for some form of positive acknowledgement from my father. But my straight A's were often met with a distracted, "That's nice, Clara," before the conversation inevitably veered towards Leo's upcoming football game or the prize he'd won in some school debate, often on a topic he'd barely researched but blustered through with confident charm. I remember one particular parents' evening. My teacher, Miss Albright, a woman with kind eyes and a genuine passion for her students, had spent a good 10 minutes extolling my potential in physics, suggesting advanced programs, even mentioning university scholarships down the line. I sat there, heart swelling, daring to hope that this time, my father would see. He listened, nodded politely, and then, as we walked out, he clapped Leo on the shoulder. Leo had gotten a passable report, nothing stellar, and said, "Well done, son. Knew you had it in you." Now, about that new bike you wanted, the praise for Leo was effusive, immediate. For me, a polite nod. It was a pattern that would repeat itself countless times, etching itself into my understanding of my place in the family. The message was clear. Leo's path, the one my father envisioned paved with traditional markers of male success, business, law, something visible and impressive, was the path that mattered. My quiet, nerdy pursuits were hobbies. Nice, but ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of things, his things. I recall once, brimming with excitement, showing him a small program I'd written on our ancient family computer, a simple little game. He glanced at it, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before saying, "That's creative, Clara. But you know, your cousin Jeffrey is articling at that big law firm downtown. Now that's a real future." The implication hung heavy in the air. My future, the one I was tentatively exploring, wasn't real. It wasn't what he valued. And so, the seeds were sown. The feeling of being less than, not because of any inherent failing, but because my currency wasn't the one he traded in. He wasn't just dismissing my interests. He was, in a way, dismissing me. This wasn't about a mansion then. It was about a fundamental disconnect, a yearning for a connection that seemed perpetually just out of reach, blocked by a wall of his preconceived notions of worth. And every time he looked past me, every time my achievements were minimized, another brick was laid in that wall, a wall I would one day, in the most unexpected way, find myself living right next to. The irony isn't lost on me that he, who so valued structures and impressive facades, would be instrumental in me building my own. As I moved into adolescence, the chasm between my father's expectations and my own burgeoning identity widened. High school was a period of intense academic focus for me. I found solace and validation in my studies, in the clear-cut success of a high grade, in the quiet encouragement of teachers who saw potential where my father saw a deviation from his preferred script. I joined the math club, the science Olympiad team, and even started a small coding club. These were my triumphs, my spaces of belonging. Yet, at home, the narrative remained stubbornly unchanged. My academic awards would be acknowledged with a cursory nod, perhaps a brief, "Good job, keep it up," before the spotlight swung back to Leo. Leo, by then, was the charming, popular captain of the soccer team, not particularly academic, but possessing an easy confidence that my father adored. His C-average reports were excused with, "He's a leader, Clara, a people person." Those are the skills that really matter in life. The implication, of course, was that my dedication to books and algorithms somehow made me less skilled in the real world. I remember the sting of those words, the quiet frustration bubbling beneath the surface. I wasn't asking to diminish Leo. I was simply asking to be seen, for my efforts to be valued on their own merit, not constantly weighed against my brothers and found wanting. The dinner table often felt like a courtroom where Leo's minor escapades were presented as amusing anecdotes, evidence of his charisma, while my achievements were footnotes, quickly passed over. It was during these years that my father began to more overtly steer Leo towards what he considered prestigious careers. Law, finance, perhaps taking over the small but growing business my father was building. For me, his advice was vague, tinged with a subtle discouragement from anything too ambitious in fields he didn't understand or respect. Perhaps teaching, Clara, he'd suggest, or something in administration. Good, stable jobs for a woman. There was no malice in his tone, just a deeply ingrained set of beliefs about gender roles and what constituted true success, beliefs that felt suffocating to me. My dreams of working in technology, of innovation, of building something new, were met with polite skepticism. Tech is so volatile, isn't it? All those .coms crashing, he'd say, conveniently ignoring the fact that the world was rapidly changing, being reshaped by the very forces I was drawn to. The unspoken message was that my aspirations were too risky, too unconventional, and perhaps, deep down, he feared I wouldn't succeed, and that perceived failure would reflect poorly on him. His approval was a tightrope I could never quite balance on. If I succeeded in my unconventional path, it was an anomaly. If I struggled, it was an "I told you so" waiting to happen. My early adulthood was marked by this constant, low-level battle for his acceptance. After university, where I studied computer science against his subtle discouragement, I landed my first job at a small tech startup. The pay was modest, the hours long, but I was exhilarated. I was learning, creating, part of something exciting. When I told my father, his response was lukewarm. "A startup? Are you sure that's wise, Clara? Leo's just been made junior manager at his firm. You know, good benefits, clear career path." The comparison was always there, a constant reminder of my perceived deviation. Leo, meanwhile, had indeed landed a comfortable job, largely through one of my father's connections. He got help with a down payment for a smart downtown apartment, a new car as a graduation present. I was navigating student loans, shared apartments in less glamorous parts of the city, and a second-hand car that sputtered more than it purred. I didn't begrudge Leo his advantages, not entirely. What hurt was the disparity in support, not just financial, but emotional. It felt like my father was investing in Leo's success, while I was left to bootstrap my own, my struggles viewed not as character building, but as evidence of my lesser choices. There was one particularly biting incident. I'd been working incredibly hard, saving every penny, and had finally managed to afford a tiny, slightly dilapidated studio apartment of my own.
It was a huge milestone for me.
I invited my parents over for a simple dinner, hoping to share my small victory. My father walked in, looked around at the cramped space, the mismatched furniture I'd painstakingly collected from thrift stores, and said, with a sigh, "Well, Clara, it's cozy. I suppose it's what you can manage for now. Leo's new place has a view of the park, you know. Granite countertops." My heart sank. Even this, my hard-won independence, was just another opportunity for him to highlight what I lacked, to measure me against his preferred yardstick and find me wanting. That evening, after they left, I sat alone in my cozy apartment and cried, not just for the dismissive comment, but for the cumulative weight of years of feeling invisible, of feeling like my worth was inextricably tied to a financial benchmark I could never seem to reach in his eyes. The mansion incident was years away, but the foundation for that profound hurt was already firmly laid, cemented by 1,000 tiny moments of casual disregard. As I navigated my 20s, a quiet determination began to solidify within me. The initial sting of my father's dismissiveness slowly morphed into a kind of resilient shield. I realized, with a dawning, painful clarity, that seeking his approval was a futile endeavor, like trying to fill a sieve with water. His validation would always be conditional, tethered to metrics I either couldn't or wouldn't meet. So, I began to turn inward, focusing on my own goals, my own definition of success. My career in tech started to gain traction. The startup I worked for, initially a scrappy underdog, began to achieve some notable successes. I was part of a brilliant team, and my contributions were recognized and valued within that sphere. I climbed the ranks, took on more responsibility, and learned an incredible amount. I started to build a reputation for being innovative, a problem solver. Yet, I kept these achievements largely to myself when it came to my family. The few times I'd tentatively shared a professional win, it had been met with the same lukewarm responses, or worse, a swift pivot back to Leo's latest, often father-funded, venture or social triumph. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother might say, while my father would grunt an acknowledgement before asking Leo about his golf handicap or his new car. It was less painful to simply not share, to keep that part of my life separate, protected from their casual, unintentional dismissals. This professional growth, however, created a new kind of distance. As I became more financially independent, more confident in my abilities, I think my father misinterpreted it. My self-reliance, born out of necessity and a desire to prove myself to myself, seemed to him like aloofness, perhaps even a quiet rebellion against the family unit he envisioned, one where he was the undisputed patriarch, the benefactor, the one everyone looked to. His own financial success had continued to grow. He'd sold his initial business for a handsome profit and moved into property development, a field that perfectly suited his love for tangible assets and grand gestures. The family's lifestyle became increasingly ostentatious. Dinners were no longer simple family meals, but often held at expensive restaurants, conversations peppered with talk of investments, acquisitions, and the right neighborhoods. I felt increasingly like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. Leo naturally thrived in this environment. He'd left his safe job, which had never really challenged him, and joined my father in the property business. He had the title, the expensive suits, the confident patter, though I often suspected the substance was lacking. He was the golden boy still, now polished to a high shine by an influx of family money, his path smoothed and gilded by our father's influence and resources. He was adept at talking a big game, at mirroring our father's materialistic ambitions, and that, it seemed, was enough. My attempts to connect with my father on a more meaningful level during this period were usually met with a conversational dead end. I remember once, I'd been working on a particularly innovative software solution for urban planning, something that could genuinely help his property development business become more efficient, more sustainable. I tentatively brought it up, thinking this might be a bridge, a way to connect my world with his. He listened for about 2 minutes, his eyes glazing over, before interrupting, "Fascinating, Clara, but a bit too theoretical for my taste. Now, Leo was just telling me about this prime piece of land he's scouted." It was a gentle but firm redirection, a clear signal that my expertise, my world, held little interest or value for him unless it directly translated into something he already understood and prized, like a quick profit or a tangible asset. The unspoken message was, stick to what you know, dear, and leave the real business to the men. It wasn't just that he didn't understand my field. He didn't try to understand. It was outside his established framework of what constituted legitimate, respectable success, and therefore, it was relegated to the periphery. The distance wasn't just physical, as I carved out my own life. It was emotional, intellectual, a vast expanse created by differing values and a lifetime of miscommunication and unmet needs. I was building a life he couldn't see because he wasn't looking in the right direction or perhaps didn't want to. And the more successful I became in my own right on my own terms, the more I felt like an alien in his increasingly opulent world, a world where, it would soon become clear, I apparently didn't have the right currency to even pay a visit. The catalyst, the moment that shifted everything from a dull ache of resignation to a burning need for action, arrived cloaked in the guise of a joyous family announcement. My father, never one for understatement, called a family dinner at a ridiculously expensive restaurant. The air was thick with anticipation. He'd been hinting at big news for weeks. My mother was fluttering with a nervous excitement, and Leo was practically preening, clearly in on the secret. I sat there, nursing a glass of overpriced water, feeling the familiar sense of detachment, a spectator at my own family's unfolding drama. Then, with a flourish, Dad dropped the bombshell. He'd purchased a mansion. Not just a large house, but a true, bona fide mansion in an incredibly exclusive, old money enclave on the outskirts of the city. He described it in lavish detail: the sprawling grounds, the swimming pool, the tennis court, the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, the imported marble, the custom-built everything. It was, by his account, the absolute pinnacle of achievement, the ultimate symbol of his success. A legacy, he proclaimed, beaming, a place for the family to gather for generations to come. I offered my congratulations, a polite, somewhat muted, "Wow, Dad, that's amazing," amidst Leo's boisterous enthusiasm and my mother's teary-eyed pride. A grand housewarming party was, of course, being planned. A statement event. "Only the best," Dad declared. "We'll have caterers, a string quartet, the works. Everyone who's anyone will be there." A small knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. These grand family displays were always fraught for me, a fresh opportunity to feel like the odd one out, the one whose life didn't quite measure up to the gleaming facade. In the weeks that followed, the party planning went into overdrive. My mother would call with breathless updates about flower arrangements and guest lists. I listened, made the appropriate noises, but a part of me dreaded it. I was busy, incredibly busy, with my own tech company which, after years of relentless hard work, was finally on the cusp of a major breakthrough. My focus was on closing a crucial funding round, on product development, on managing my growing team. A lavish party in a soulless mansion felt worlds away from my reality and, frankly, unimportant in comparison. A few days before the event, I realized I hadn't formally RSVP'd, caught up in a whirlwind of late nights and crucial meetings. I decided to call my father, partly to confirm I could make it, partly, I suppose, to try and show some enthusiasm, to bridge that ever-present gap. I pictured the scene, him, expansive and pleased, me, the dutiful daughter. The reality was a brutal splash of cold water. I reached him on his cell. "Dad, hi, it's Clara," he said, his voice a little distant, preoccupied. "Just calling about the housewarming. Sounds like it's going to be quite the affair." "It is," he said, a note of self-satisfaction in his tone. "Everything's coming together perfectly. Top-shelf champagne, valet parking, you know how it is." Then, a slight pause. "Actually, Clara, darling," he began, his voice shifting, adopting a tone that was simultaneously patronizing and dismissive, a tone I knew all too well. "About the party, it's shaping up to be a very, very exclusive guest list. A lot of my new neighbors, business associates, you understand." I felt a chill despite the warmth of my office. "And frankly," he continued, the words dropping like ice chips into my ear, "with your current situation, you might feel a bit out of place. This house, Clara, this neighborhood, it's a different world. A different league. Perhaps it would be better if you sat this one out. Maybe once you're a bit more established, My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. He wasn't done. Honestly, this place, the people, it isn't really for those struggling to make ends meet. You'd be uncomfortable. And to be frank, I'd be uncomfortable for you struggling to make ends meet. I had just secured a 7-figure seed funding round for my company. I wasn't struggling. I was on the verge of something huge. But he didn't know that. He didn't care to know. In his mind, I was still the daughter with the unstable tech job and the cozy little apartment. The silence stretched. Finally, I managed to choke. I see. Good girl, he said, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the devastation he'd just wrought. We'll have a quiet family dinner sometime soon, just us, when things calm down. Much more your speed. And then he hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, his words echoing in the sudden, crushing silence.
Shock?
Pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a wave of hurt, so profound it felt like a physical blow. Then came the anger, a cold, hard fury that began to smolder deep within me. This wasn't just a snub, it was a judgment, a pronouncement of my inadequacy, delivered with casual, breathtaking cruelty. That night I couldn't sleep. His words replayed in my mind, each syllable a fresh stab. The next morning I called my best friend, Sarah. Sarah had been my rock through years of family dramas, my academic struggles, my startup anxieties. I recounted the conversation, my voice trembling with a mixture of pain and rage. Sarah listened, as she always did, without interruption. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then she said, her voice firm, "Clara, that man is an absolute, unmitigated ass." Her bluntness was a bomb. "He has no idea who you are, what you're capable of, does he?" "Apparently not," I whispered. "So," she said, a dangerous glint I could almost hear in her voice. "What are you going to do about it? Are you going to let him define you as too poor to breathe his rarefied air?" And then, almost as a dare, she added, "You know, wouldn't it be hilarious if you, bought the house next door to him?" We both laughed, a slightly hysterical, incredulous laugh. But then, the laughter died down, and the idea, initially so outlandish, so absurd, began to take root. What if? The thought, wild and audacious, sparked something in the ashes of my humiliation. It was crazy. It was impossible. Or was it? The seed of Sarah's outrageous suggestion, "Wouldn't it be hilarious if you bought the house next door?" refused to be dismissed. It clung to my thoughts, transforming from a wild joke into a quiet, insistent hum beneath the surface of my daily life. The initial, searing hurt from my father's words began to cool, not into forgiveness, but into a sharply honed resolve. His dismissal, meant to put me in my place, had instead dislodged me from it, freeing me to consider possibilities I never dared to entertain. He thought I was struggling to make ends meet. He thought I didn't fit into his world of opulence. A new kind of ambition, colder and more focused than any I'd felt before, began to take shape. It wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about redefining my own landscape on my own terms in a way he couldn't ignore or diminish. The first, almost furtive step was research. Fueled by a potent cocktail of indignation and caffeine, I spent a late night scouring online property listings in my father's new, ultra-exclusive neighborhood. It was an act of fantasy at first, a way to channel my anger. I looked at the sprawling estates, the eye-watering price tags, the sheer audacity of it all. And then I saw it. Next door to the very address my father had so proudly proclaimed as his new domain, a property was listed for sale. It wasn't as ostentatious as his, perhaps a little older, a touch more understated, but it was undeniably in the same league, on the same coveted street. The listing photos showed a beautiful, classic home, perhaps in need of some modernization, with grounds that, while substantial, looked a little neglected. The price was astronomical, terrifyingly so. But the idea, that tiny, audacious seed, began to sprout. It was a long shot, a monumental, Everest-sized long shot. My company was doing well. The recent funding round was a game changer. But this? This was an entirely different stratosphere of financial commitment. Yet the image of my father's face, were I to pull this off, was a powerful motivator. More powerful still was the thought of claiming that space, not out of spite, though there was an element of that, I won't lie, but as a definitive statement of my own arrival, my own success, achieved entirely independently of him. The next few months were a blur of relentless work. I threw myself into my company with a singular, almost ferocious focus. The funding we'd secured needed to be leveraged perfectly. We had aggressive growth targets, product launch deadlines, and a board of investors to keep happy. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and an unyielding determination. Sleep became a luxury, social life a distant memory. My team, sensing the shift in my intensity, rose to the occasion. We were a well-oiled machine, driven by a shared vision, and now, by my own fiercely personal, unspoken mission. Every successful negotiation, every milestone reached, every positive revenue report wasn't just a win for the company, it was another small step towards that impossible house. I lived and breathed my work. The stress was immense. There were days I thought I was insane, chasing this outlandish goal fueled by a lifetime of hurt. Doubts gnawed at me. Was I doing this for the right reasons? Was I letting my father's negativity dictate my life choices, even in this reactive way? Sarah, my constant confidant, was my sounding board. It's not just about him, Clara. She'd remind me during late-night calls when I was on the verge of exhaustion or despair. This is about you claiming your power. The house is just a symbol, a very big, very expensive symbol of what you've achieved despite him, not because of him. And honestly, she'd add with a chuckle, the look on his face will be a bonus. Her pragmatism, her unwavering belief in me, kept me tethered. I began to explore the financial practicalities. I spoke to my financial advisor, who initially looked at me as if I'd grown a second head when I outlined my ambition. But as I laid out my company's trajectory, my personal equity, the projections, his expression shifted from skepticism to cautious optimism, and then, finally, to a kind of respectful awe. It's ambitious, Clara, he'd said, extremely ambitious, but not impossible. If these projections hold, if your company continues this growth. The house next door remained on the market. It was as if it was waiting. I made discreet inquiries through a high-end realtor, keeping my identity veiled for as long as possible. The process was complex, involving layers of financial scrutiny. All the while, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Polite but brief responses to my mother's occasional calls. No mention of my burgeoning success, and certainly no hint of my audacious plan. Let them continue to believe I was the struggling daughter, the one who didn't quite fit. The element of surprise was crucial. Finally, after months of painstaking work, of nerve-wracking negotiations, of liquidating stock options at just the right moment, the impossible happened. The offer was accepted. The contracts were drawn up. There were moments during the closing process where I thought the whole thing would fall apart, where a wave of panic would wash over me. What was I doing? This was madness. But then I'd remember his voice on the phone, that casual, cutting dismissal, and the resolve would harden anew. This wasn't just buying a house. It was buying back a piece of my own self-respect, a piece he had tried to take from me. It was a declaration that I would define my own worth, my own place in the world. And that place, as fate would have it, was about to be right next door to his. The day I got the keys was surreal. I stood in the grand, empty foyer of my new house. My house, the scent of beeswax from the polished, though slightly faded, parquet floor filling my nostrils. Sunlight streamed through the large, mullioned windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet, a dignified, expectant silence. A wave of emotion washed over me, triumph, disbelief, a touch of trepidation, and a profound, almost overwhelming sense of vindication. I had done it! Against all odds, against his pronouncements, against my own deepest fears, I had actually done it. The house needed work, cosmetic touches mostly, a modernization of the kitchen and bathrooms, a refresh of the decor to reflect my own taste rather than the previous owner's more traditional style. But the bones were magnificent, the space incredible, and the location? Impeccable. Right next door to Richard Thorne's new palace. Now came the question of the reveal. How did one announce such a thing? A casual phone call? Oh, hi Dad, guess what? I'm your new neighbor. No, that lacked the necessary impact. This wasn't just news to be shared, it was a statement to be made. I wanted him to see it, to process it, not through the filter of a telephone line, but with his own eyes. I decided to let my arrival speak for itself. I timed it carefully. I knew from my mother's incidental chatter that my father was planning a casual Saturday afternoon barbecue for some of his new, influential neighbors, a sort of informal follow-up to the grand housewarming I hadn't been deemed worthy of attending.
Perfect.
On that Saturday, as the tantalizing smell of grilled meat began to waft over the high garden wall separating our properties, I arranged for the arrival of a very large, very conspicuous moving truck. Not one of those discreet, unmarked vans, but a huge, branded vehicle from a high-end moving company, the kind that screamed someone substantial is moving in. I also hired a small landscaping crew to begin some immediate, visible work on the front garden, clearing some overgrown shrubs and generally making a bit of a present, but not disruptive, commotion. I was in my new living room, sipping a glass of champagne, a much better vintage than he'd probably ever serve, when I heard the first surprised murmurs from his side of the fence. I could picture it, his guests, cocktails in hand, noticing the activity next door. Then, a little later, I saw him. My father, Richard, emerged from his patio doors, a proprietary air about him, clearly intending to investigate the disturbance. He strode across his manicured lawn towards the dividing wall, peering over it with a frown. He saw the moving truck first, then the landscapers. His frown deepened. He probably assumed the previous owners were finally moving out their last bits, or perhaps renters were moving in, something he'd undoubtedly disapprove of in his neighborhood. And then he saw me. I had deliberately chosen that moment to step out into my own front garden, ostensibly to speak with the head landscaper. I was dressed well, in a casually elegant outfit that spoke of quiet confidence. I turned, as if surprised to see him there, a polite, neutral expression on my face. For a moment, he just stared. His jaw, usually set in such firm, authoritative lines, went slack. Confusion warred with disbelief in his eyes. He blinked, as if unsure he was seeing correctly. Clara, he finally managed, his voice a strange mix of bewilderment and accusation. What on earth are you doing here? Are you visiting someone? Did the new owners hire you for something? His mind clearly couldn't process the reality. The idea of me, his daughter, the one struggling to make ends meet, being present in this context, on this side of the property line as anything other than a hired help or a lost guest, was simply beyond his comprehension. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times was finally here. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "No, Dad," I said, my voice calm, clear, and carrying easily across the pristine lawn that separated us. "I'm not visiting. I'm not working for them." I paused for effect, letting the anticipation hang in the air, enjoying the kaleidoscope of emotions flickering across his face. "I am the new owner. I bought the house." The silence that followed my declaration was profound. It was as if the chirping of birds, the distant hum of traffic, even the sizzle from his barbecue, had momentarily ceased, holding its breath. My father's face was a study in incredulity. His mouth opened, then closed again, like a fish gasping for air. The ruddy complexion he'd acquired from years of good living and, I suspected, high blood pressure, seemed to pale slightly. "You," he finally sputtered, the word laced with sheer disbelief. "You bought this house? Clara, this is no time for jokes. What's really going on?" His eyes darted from me to the moving truck, then back to my face, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate prank, a misunderstanding. Leo appeared at his side then, drawn by the sudden quiet or perhaps by our father's stunned expression. He had a beer in his hand and a smug look that quickly evaporated when he took in the scene, me, standing on the lawn of the house next door, the moving truck, our father's dumbfounded face. "What's up?" Leo asked, then his eyes widened as he processed the implications. "Wait, Clara? What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, my father found his voice again, louder this time, tinged with an unmistakable edge of anger. "How could you possibly afford a place like this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This is absurd. Where would you get that kind of money? Did you win the lottery? Is this some scheme?" The accusation in his tone was like a slap in the face, yet, oddly, it didn't sting as much as his earlier dismissal had. This time, I was prepared. This time, I held all the cards. "No, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level, though a tremor of adrenaline was running through me. "I didn't win the lottery. I earned it. My company, the one you always thought was just a little hobby, has become quite successful. Very successful. In fact, I saw a flicker of something. Was it confusion? Annoyance? Cross his face at the mention of my company. He never paid it much attention, never bothered to understand what I did. Leo just looked bewildered. Your little computer thing?" he mumbled, as if trying to reconcile the idea with the multi-million-dollar property before him. My mother appeared then, drawn by the commotion, her expression anxious. She looked from my father's thunderous face to mine, a dawning horror spreading across her features. "Richard? Clara? What's happening?" she asked, her voice quavering. My father ignored her. His gaze was locked on me, his initial shock giving way to a dark, simmering fury. "I don't believe you," he stated flatly. "You're lying. This is some kind of stunt." It was then that years of suppressed hurt, of feeling invisible, of being constantly underestimated and dismissed, finally found an outlet. But it wasn't the explosion of rage I might have once imagined. Instead, it was a cold, clear current of truth. "Lying, Dad?" I asked, a sad smile playing on my lips. "Why would I lie about something like this? You were the one who told me I wouldn't fit in at your housewarming, that I was too poor to even step inside your precious mansion. Remember that phone call? Remember how you so kindly suggested I stay away because I'd be uncomfortable and, more importantly, you'd be uncomfortable for me?" His face tightened, a dull flush creeping up his neck. He remembered. Of course, he remembered. He probably hadn't given it a second thought after he'd hung up, but I had replayed that conversation endlessly. "So," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I decided I needed a place where I would fit in. A place where I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. And as it turns out, this place," I gestured to the house behind me, its quiet elegance a stark contrast to the turmoil on his lawn, "was available. Imagine my surprise when I found out it was right next door to you. Turns out, you're my neighbor now, Dad. Funny how things work out, isn't it?" The carefully constructed facade of his superiority began to crumble. His guests, who had been trying to pretend they weren't listening, were now openly staring, their earlier conviviality replaced by a fascinated, awkward silence. The smell of charring meat from the neglected barbecue filled the air, a fitting scent for the immolation of his carefully curated image. Leo, ever his father's son, tried to bluster. "This is ridiculous, Clara. You can't just do this. Dad worked his whole life for his home. And I haven't." I shot back, my gaze shifting to my brother. "While you were getting handouts and easy opportunities, Leo, I was building something from scratch. While you were coasting on Dad's connections and money, I was working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. You have no idea what it took to get here. All those times you got the praise, the new car, the down payment, while I was told my ambitions were unrealistic or not for a woman. This," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even myself, "this is what happens when you finally get tired of fighting for scraps. You decide to buy your own damn table, in the best damn dining room you can find." My mother made a small, distressed sound, her hand flying to her mouth. "Clara, please. Richard, let's all just calm down." But my father was beyond calming. He looked like a man who had been physically struck. His world, with its carefully defined hierarchies, its comfortable assumptions about my place within it, had just been turned upside down. You did this to embarrass me, he accused, his voice hoarse. To humiliate me in front of my friends, my neighbors. Embarrass you? I replied, the calmness in my voice a stark contrast to his rising fury.
No, Dad.
I did this for me. I did this because I was tired of being told I wasn't good enough. I did this to prove to myself that I could achieve anything I set my mind to, regardless of whether you believed in me or not. Your discomfort, your embarrassment? That's just a consequence of your own actions, your own words. You built this wall between us, brick by brick, with every dismissive comment, every overlooked achievement. I just decided to build my own house on the other side of it. A house where I know I belong, because I built it, I earned it, and I own it. I held his gaze for a long moment, letting my words sink in. The anger in his eyes was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a dawning, horrified understanding, perhaps even a sliver of grudging, unwilling respect. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. I didn't wait for a response. I had said what I needed to say. I gave a small nod, more to myself than to him, then turned and walked back towards my front door, the click of my heels on the stone path the only sound in the sudden, stunned silence. As I stepped inside, into the cool, quiet sanctuary of my new home, I heard my mother's plaintive voice. Richard, what are we going to do? I closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, my heart pounding, but a profound sense of peace settling over me. The confrontation was over. A new chapter had begun. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was, as you can imagine, thick with an almost palpable tension. Living next door to my father, after that dramatic reveal, was like coexisting with a dormant volcano. You could sense the pressure building beneath the surface, even in the silences. The first few weeks were characterized by a strained, awkward quiet. My father made no attempt to speak to me. If he was in his garden and I stepped into mine, he would abruptly turn and go inside. It was childish, yes, but also deeply telling of his inability to process what had happened, his unwillingness to concede an inch. My mother, on the other hand, was a nervous wreck. She called me a few times, her voice hushed as if she were afraid of being overheard. Clara, darling, your father he's very upset, she'd whisper. Can't you just apologize? Smooth things over. Apologize for what, Mom? I'd ask gently but firmly. For succeeding? For buying a house? For finally standing up for myself after years of being dismissed? She'd sigh, a weary, defeated sound. I know, dear, I know he said things, but he's your father. Can't we just try to find some peace? I understood her desire for peace, I truly did. But peace at the cost of my own self-respect, my own truth, was no longer a price I was willing to pay. Mom, I told her, I'm not looking for a fight. I'm perfectly happy to be a good neighbor. But I won't apologize for achieving my goals or for speaking the truth about how I've been treated. The ball is in his court if he wants to bridge this gap. But it has to start with him acknowledging his part in it, not with me pretending it never happened. That, of course, was a bridge too far for Richard Thorne. He was a man constitutionally incapable of admitting fault, especially to his own daughter, especially when that daughter had so thoroughly upended his perception of her. Leo was predictably hostile, though mostly from a distance. I'd see him visiting my father, and he'd shoot dark looks over the fence, the golden boy clearly perturbed that his carefully maintained status had been so publicly challenged by his lesser sibling. I ignored him. His opinions, so heavily influenced by my father's, had long ceased to matter to me. I focused on settling into my new home, on making it my own. Renovations began, tasteful and elegant. I hired a landscape architect to transform the neglected gardens into something beautiful and serene. My house became my sanctuary, a testament to my hard work and a symbol of my independence. And slowly, something shifted within me. The anger, the burning need for vindication, began to fade, replaced by a quieter, more profound sense of self-worth. The house, initially a defiant gesture, became simply home. A place of peace, of creativity, a place where I could be authentically myself, without judgment, without needing to prove anything to anyone. I learned that true wealth wasn't just about the money in the bank or the square footage of your property. It was about self-respect, inner peace, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. It was about surrounding yourself with people who genuinely saw you, valued you, and supported you, friends like Sarah, my amazing team at work, people who celebrated my successes without caveat or comparison. My relationship with my father was irrevocably changed, of course. The old dynamic of me craving his approval and him withholding it was shattered. What would replace it remained to be seen, but I was no longer invested in controlling that outcome. My peace of mind no longer depended on his validation. There were small, awkward encounters. Sometimes we'd both be getting our mail at the same time. A curt nod from him, a polite good morning from me. Nothing more. The silence between our houses was louder than any argument. My mother, however, did begin to reach out in small, tentative ways. Once, she left a small pot of flowers on my doorstep with a note. These reminded me of the ones you loved in Grandma's garden. Love, Mom. It was a tiny olive branch, perhaps, or maybe just a mother's attempt to bridge an impossible divide in her own way. I appreciated the gesture. It hinted at a private regret, a silent acknowledgement of the pain I'd endured, even if she couldn't voice it openly against my father's formidable will. I found a new rhythm. I hosted my own gatherings, not lavish, ostentatious affairs like my father's, but warm, intimate dinners and brunches for my friends, for my team, for people who genuinely enriched my life. My garden, once overgrown, began to bloom, a riot of color and life. And sometimes I'd sit on my new patio, sipping coffee, and I'd see my father in his garden, looking over, his expression unreadable. The sweet irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally on his level, living in the same exclusive enclave he prized so highly, but I had arrived there on my own terms, by my own efforts. The family I had wasn't the idyllic one I might have wished for as a child, but I was no longer mourning that loss. I was too busy building my own version of happiness, my own definition of family, one based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering support. The house next door was no longer just a symbol of defiance. It was a symbol of my liberation. Life in the house next door to my father settled into a new, albeit somewhat surreal, normal. The initial shockwaves from my arrival had subsided, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. The vindication I had initially craved so fiercely had mellowed into a quiet, confident peace. It was never just about the house, you see. The house was merely the stage upon which a much deeper, more personal drama of self-discovery and empowerment played out. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about proving to myself, more than anyone else, that I was the author of my own story, not a minor character in someone else's. My father and I existed in a state of wary, distant cohabitation. Occasionally, if he was outside and unavoidable, he might offer a stiff, almost formal greeting. Once, I overheard him talking to one of his associates over the fence, gesturing vaguely in my direction, and I caught the words, "My daughter, next door." Very successful in the tech world. You know, it was delivered with a strange mixture of proprietary pride and, I sensed, a lingering bewilderment, as if he were still trying to reconcile this new version of Clara with the one he'd held in his mind for so long. I didn't rise to it. I no longer needed his validation, whether overt or grudgingly implied. My success was mine, earned and enjoyed for its own sake, not as a reflection for him to bask in. The greatest change was internal. The chip on my shoulder, carried for so many years, had finally dissolved. I was no longer operating from a place of hurt or a need to prove my worth to those who had denied it. I was operating from a place of strength, of self-acceptance. I poured my energy into my company, which continued to flourish, and into nurturing the healthy relationships in my life. Sarah remained my steadfast friend, and we often laughed about the sheer audacity of it all, marveling at how a moment of deep pain had catalyzed such a profound transformation. My mother continued her tentative overtures. Small gifts, brief, slightly awkward phone calls where she'd talk about everything but the elephant in the room, Or rather, the mansion next door. I understood she was caught in an impossible position, loyal to her husband yet, I believed, privately proud of, and perhaps a little pained for me. I accepted her efforts for what they were, a quiet acknowledgement that transcended the charged silence from my father. As for Leo, his initial hostilities seemed to curdle into a kind of resentful envy. He was still my father's golden boy, still benefiting from his largesse, but my independent success, achieved without any of the familial scaffolding he relied upon, seemed to be a constant, uncomfortable reminder of his own limitations. Their property business had hit a few snags, I heard through the grapevine, and my father's Midas touch wasn't looking quite so infallible. I took no pleasure in this, but it did underscore the precariousness of a life built on appearances rather than solid, earned foundations. The real lesson in all of this wasn't about revenge, or even about proving someone wrong. It was about the incredible power that lies in refusing to let others define your limits or your worth. It was about taking the negativity, the dismissals, the underestimations, and using them not as bricks to build a wall of resentment around yourself, but as fuel to power your ascent. But it's a tricky balance. You can't let that fuel burn you up from the inside. The goal must always be your own peace, your own fulfillment, not the continued engagement in a battle that only depletes you. I started a small mentorship program for young women entering the tech field, particularly those from backgrounds where they might not receive the encouragement or support they deserved. Sharing my story, my experiences, helping them navigate the challenges, that became a new source of joy and purpose. It was my way of paying forward the resilience I'd had to cultivate. The mansion next door to my father's became a symbol not of defiance, but of arrival. My arrival, at a place of peace, of strength, of self-possession. It was a beautiful home, yes, but its true value lay in what it represented. The journey of a young woman who was once told she was too poor to visit, who dared to dream bigger, work harder, and ultimately build her own damn palace right next door. So, that's my story. Or, at least, a very significant chapter of it. From being dismissed as too poor and out of place to becoming my father's next-door neighbor in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, it's been a wild, challenging, and ultimately incredibly empowering ride. It wasn't a straight path, and there were so many moments when the weight of doubt, the sting of old wounds, and the sheer exhaustion threatened to derail me. But that single, careless comment, intended to diminish me, instead became the unlikely cornerstone upon which I rebuilt my self-belief and, quite literally, my home. The house, as grand as it is, was never really the end goal. It was the tangible proof, to myself first and foremost, that I could overcome the limitations others tried to impose on me, especially those rooted in the painful dynamics of my own family. It was about transforming years of feeling less than into a powerful affirmation of I am. It was about finding my own voice, my own strength, and my own definition of success, far removed from the conditional approval I once craved. Living next to my father now is interesting. The tension has eased into a kind of truce of distance. We are neighbors. Civil but not close. Perhaps in his own way he's processing things. Or perhaps not. Ultimately, his journey is his own. Mine has been about finding peace and empowerment, irrespective of his views or actions. The real victory isn't the address. It's the quiet confidence that now settles in my heart, the knowledge that I faced down my own demons, fueled by the dismissiveness of others, and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more authentically myself. It's about understanding that your worth is inherent. It's not granted by anyone else, no matter how much power you might have once given them over your feelings. It took me a long time and a very specific, audacious act to fully internalize that. But I'm here now, and I wouldn't trade the lessons, as hard-earned as they were, for anything. What about you all? Have any of you ever experienced that moment when someone, especially someone close to you, tried to define your limits or tell you weren't good enough, rich enough, or smart enough? How did you handle it? Did you let it break you? Or did you use it as fuel? I truly believe our most challenging moments can become our greatest catalysts for growth if we allow them to. Please share your stories in the comments below. I genuinely love reading them, and I know your experiences can inspire others who might be going through something similar right now. There's so much strength in shared stories. If this video resonated with you, if my journey struck a chord, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel reach more people. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I plan on sharing more about building a life on your own terms, overcoming adversity, and maybe even a few tips on navigating complicated family dynamics. If you know someone who needs to hear this message today, someone who's been made to feel small or unworthy, please share this video with them. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone, that others have walked a similar path and found their way through, can make all the difference. Thank you all so much for watching, for listening, and for being a part of this community. Your support means the world to me. Remember, you are capable, you are worthy, and you get to define your own damn palace. I'll see you in the next one.